Hello. It is, oh my gosh, week 11 in the tabletop role playing class. And we have a 15-week semester. So, what that means is we've got about a month before our week off for Thanksgiving and then our kind of vestigial week after break. And then exams, which this class doesn't have exams. It has a contract that students individually formulate with me based on some guidelines, as well as an unessay project. That's a lot of exploration that is in the student's control, and that can actually be a little overwhelming, especially at this part of the semester. So, we've got 2 weeks coming up ahead of basically constraint where I ask them questions about their adopted tabletop role playing game. And then 2 weeks where I will have constructed, based on their interests and things that they would like more of, a few more days of experiences. So, this was the first day that we returned to the adopted tabletop role playing games. Every student has one. They range wildly from everything from paranoia to the deep dark to amending and beyond. We asked the question before class as a kind of preparatory exercise. What is your game's genealogy? And what do I mean by that? A series of questions. Who are the creators of your game? Was it a large team, a small team, a solo operation? When was your game published and by what company? Or was it done print on demand, put on itch.io, or some other kind of mechanisms for circulation? This is all what we in book history refer to as Robert Darnton's idea of the communication circuit, which has been kind of updated and tweaked to reflect different kinds of publishing practices ever since it was first formulated for old school, what we call hand press books. In the idea of the communication circuit, there's a whole bunch of people at different stages of the production of a text. And in addition to the loop of editors and writers and illustrators and literal printers involved in a communication circuit, we also have the kind of influences that inspire a book and the ways that a book or other kind of text in turn starts this circuit going again with a new text. So, we are also talking about genealogies in terms of inspiring games and games that are then inspired by. Hi, alarm. This is fine. The point here is that no game exists alone. Very few games are made by solo creators, but in addition, games are built inside of communities. And increasingly, since 2010 and the powered by the apocalypse kind of descent from apocalypse world, we have more and more creators who, within the bodies of their text, signal the other games that inspire them, either because they are, for example, powered by the apocalypse or in turn forged by the dark games, or something like Descended from the Queen games, or just because they have kind of inked by the dark the ethos over the last well over a decade of the idea that we may not be licensing things. Game mechanics can't be copyrighted. And so the story of tabletop role playing games is of constant innovation and tweaking. As James Hake has said, everyone is a game designer if you run games, precisely because you're always modifying for the people in front of you. But more importantly, even than that is the idea of the ways in which people are making things in community. So we talked about game jams. We talked about the legacy of different groups of people and different collaborators who will work on a project together and then maybe, split off, work with other folks and bring those kinds of legacies with them. Some of those things are really easy to trace within the bodies of the text themselves. Some require a little bit of Googling, and some of them are not obvious at all. And so, one of the other things that was really important to talk about were the games that were really transparent in these kinds of ways and the games that weren't. as well as the larger world of inspirations. So that can include everything from what we call licensed games that are using in a very legal and specific kind of contractual form established intellectual property, such as the Avatar game or the Marvel game, but also, in the fuzzier world, all of the different influences that designers mentioned that aren't games at all. Television, film, books, comic books, all of these things can be grist for the mill. In addition, we had people like Shingin Core, who in amending cites their own friends, which is incredibly lovely. So we went around the room and we talked about those things, and we took a close look at the declarative statement that the bakers have on their website as to what a apocalypse world powered by the apocalypse game is. And of course, and this is very strange for an English professor, as I said to my students, powered by the apocalypse games are just games that say that they're inspired by apocalypse world. You don't need anything else concrete in order to be a PBTA game. And if you don't say that your game is PBTA and other people think it might be, the bakers are going to side with the creator on that one. Which is really, really fascinating. And so it got into a really interesting conversation about the ways that um, not just PBTA, but other kinds of citational practices that are disconnected from monetary licensing agreements are a really interesting kind of part of the tabletop ecosystem. And one of my students said, can't think of another space in which this kind of citational practice, but not kind of monetary practice really exists. What was interesting was this was an education major. And one of the most fascinating spaces of equal tension these days is a website that the student cited, which is Teachers Pay Teachers. Used to be that teachers did things open source and shared class materials and different kinds of preparations. And this is an ethos that still exists to this day. If you want to see, you can go down in the doobly doo, copy and paste, and you can see my whole syllabus, at least as it was constructed at the beginning of the semester. An update will be put in at the end. I hope that other people will take my example and remix it for their own contexts and their own teaching demands. Certainly, you can't copy paste my class into another context because I'm weird and the place that I teach is very specific and the students are of a particular kind and I have a pretty light teaching load compared to many of my peers. But hopefully there's some ideas in these vlogs and in my own syllabi that give you some ideas. And of course, Only Play Wizards, who you can see in the chat, John Boltana, is someone who is teaching in very different kinds of but complementary ways around games, and so are so many others. And I'm not charging for any of that, but I don't blame the kind of teachers pay teachers model because it's a symptom of a much larger issue in the entire kind of fundamental nature of how people are compensated for their labor. Teachers aren't paid very much. Honestly, most professors aren't. Look into adjunctification. And so it makes sense in that kind of rationale in this mad world that we're in that people will micro monetize and monetize a whole lot of things, which is why Powered by the Apocalypse baffled some of my students. They could not imagine the idea of an influential game that isn't being licensed for a fee. In other words, the bakers could have made, hypothetically, an enormous amount of money on PBTA games. But of course, the counter argument to that is, would PBTA games have spread as far and wide if they hadn't been functionally some version of open access? It's hard to say. But what we know now is that PBTA games and those that are inspired but don't necessarily think of themselves as powered by the apocalypse are incredibly influential in all kinds of ways. You can't go too many branches out from any given game before you run into the baker's work or at least their ethos. This is a densely interconnected kind of system, not just because people know each other, although that can sometimes be the case, but also just because free things move around. And when the only price for admission is acknowledging the inspiration, well, that's free. Exposure doesn't pay, as some of my students were quick to note, but it does ensure that things move around. This is the challenge. And this is something that inspired a lot of questions, especially questions that were focused on, what the bakers think now, over a decade after kind of the invention of Apocalypse World and its initial circulation. And fingers crossed, they may get to ask those questions. We're going to see, which is an exciting day of discussion around intellectual property and licensing and ethics and all kinds of things, and also leads into some of the students' other interests. Students are really interested in exploring, after we finish interrogating our adopted games, things like digital tools and virtual tabletops. And luckily, Josh Simon at Demiplane is willing to hook us up with the ability to examine some of those, which will allow us to look into some licensed games and look into the kind of weird space between games and look into the kind of weird space between digital and analog that we all now live in, right? I have D&D Beyond on my phone when I'm playing D&D, even if I'm in person. And of course, my in-person game has a almost permanently kind of remote player. So we've got a camera pointed at our battle map, and we hear the voice coming from the laptop, even when the rest of us are eating ridiculous snacks from Aldi and Costco. This is also something that we talked about before class today. Um, Final housekeeping note before recap, and I'm happy to answer questions about what we did today and where we're going. But I also just want to note, because this is a teaching vlog, and also because students check in on this to see, what happened in class if they missed it, or if they just want to refresh what we were talking about. I kind of screwed up. And it became a really interesting discussion about document design and the ways in which written instructions, be it a syllabus or be it a syllabus or a game mechanic, really don't survive encounter with actual human beings. And that's why we do a lot of play testing. Harder to play test in a syllabus. And this syllabus has kind of run in this way twice, but every new group of students is a little bit different. And so here's where something that I've done many, many times, which is the task part of my contract, where students do anywhere between 3 and 5 different tasks. They can watch actual plays and do reports. They can play additional games and do reports. And with approval, they can look into scholarship, that sort of thing. Runs up against the new part of the syllabus, which is the adopted tabletop role-playing game. The challenge here is they also have to write a facilitator's play report as part of adopting the game. They will have run it 3 times. Ideally, if they're strapped for time, they can run one mega Saturday or Sunday session. Or if they're time, they can run one mega Saturday or Sunday session. Or if they're playing a solo journaling game, it's spread out across the whole semester. But so that facilitator's play report got conflated with the play reports for additional games that was elsewhere in our learning management software. That's my bad. But it also meant that, thank goodness we were doing mid-semester contract checks, so I could check in with students and say, hey, you've been writing play reports, you didn't need to, but you also now have to figure out tasks that fit that you can get done. Luckily, as we all know, Encounter Party is debuting before the end of our semester, and I'm willing to give credit to students who do an actual play report on that, even though it's only 22 minutes long. So hopefully that meets students kind of halfway between, a kind of misreading that is, on me and on them. I couldn't have anticipated it. And, no one was trying to get, the jump on anybody else. I want them to kind of have a robust and wide-ranging experience of different forms in the class. And I can, what are normally tasks that are designed for 2 to 4 hours, I'm willing to have one be shorter. I am really sorry for mic buzzing. I'm not sure what's going on because it's the same audio as always, but here we are. I will double check. But yeah, so there's an echo buzz. I'm not sure about feedback. Let's see if this works. And I cannot change this. And do the fun input thing, but I don't think I can change my input in the middle of the stream. My apologies. And yeah. So that is the story for today, and I will obviously be technologically tinkering, not for the first time, but probably not for the last. Not for the first time, but probably not for the last. And we will be back on Thursday for more questions. And this time around, Thursday, I think is going to prove to be the most interesting of this week's days in terms of heavy debate and discussion, because the question on the table is wait for it. What counts as indie, and whose games count? So given the audio wonkiness, I'm going to call it for now. But hopefully we'll all be able to join on Thursday. Please feel free to put questions in the comments. I'll be responding to them. And of course, you can find me on socials, FRIEDE, basically just about everywhere except for Threads and Instagram. I'm curious as to what questions you have about either adopting tabletop games or beyond. But until then, thank you very much for being here. Bye.